Yeah, I mean, this team's full of winners. Myself, I know I'm a winner to go through, losses and some trials like that. Um, it's not, it's not what I hold this team to be. Um, as a leader of this team, with Nick right here, I know that we got more than take, and I know what it means for us to wear Wisconsin across our chest and to go out there and not show the effort that state of Wisconsin deserves, the program deserves for the first 20 minutes. Like Coach said, the second 20 minutes, I think we played a lot better as a team and we came together and we fought, but it needs to be a full 40. And I know this team's full of winners and we're going to bounce back. But yeah, this sucks. We're going to get back in the gym, coach, and the team, and yeah, we're going to bounce back.
That was a little Tim Tebow-esque there from Nolan Winter following Wisconsin's 76-66 overtime loss to Villanova. Sorry for rebooting this podcast at what seems like a tough time for this program. I seem to thrive in chaos anyway. I was going to come back after Marquette, which would have been a great time because things obviously would have been a lot more upbeat and positive. But now that football season's over, I got a little more time to do this here. Anyways, coming off the worst loss of the Greg Gard era, a 90-60 defeat at the hands of Nebraska last Wednesday. How does Wisconsin follow it up? Well, after 9 days off, you'd think they'd have a little more fire under their belts against a Villanova team that, while solid, certainly shouldn't have handled Wisconsin the way they did for essentially 30 out of 40 minutes on Friday at Pfizer V Forum in Milwaukee. To their credit, for Wisconsin, that was a really good 12 minutes of basketball in the second half. 18-6 run pushes that game into overtime. Wisconsin trailed by as many as 15. But my biggest question after leaving the arena is, why did it take Wisconsin getting down 15 to do that? You would have thought BYU would have been the wake-up call. What about TCU? Certainly Nebraska should have been. And again, to Wisconsin's credit, I thought defensively, which had been their biggest problem all season, they had a little more juice, a lot more fire than they usually have played with on that end of the floor. Villanova came out early, hit some tough shots. Now, Wisconsin had some breakdowns, especially late in the shot clock. It felt like they let shooters go during the last 5 seconds for whatever reason. Their ball screen coverage, you could tell they were making mistakes, switching when they shouldn't have been switching, and vice versa. And you could hear Greg Gard on the sidelines really frustrated over that. And you had 9 days to prepare for this team. Those types of mistakes shouldn't have happened, but that allowed Villanova to really get comfortable there in an arena where it wasn't a home game for Wisconsin, but it essentially was with that crowd. And they've played at Pfizer V Forum earlier this season in an exhibition loss to Oklahoma. Badgers were back on their heels pretty much all game, minus the last 10 minutes or so in that second half. And again, why did it have to take getting down 15 for this team to really start to fight and show the fire that Greg Gard's been yelling from the rooftops for? This is a program, I don't care if it's the NIL era, I don't care if it's the transfer portal era. This is a program where we shouldn't have to be questioning effort, energy, and intensity. Those types of things have to be non-negotiable, and they are for Coach Gard. I don't want to be up here talking about that stuff. I'd much rather be talking about execution than energy and effort. But, for the fourth time this season, Wisconsin's had an uninspiring loss. And a lot of it, I know toughness and physicality might be a little different than energy and effort, but, those kind of things fall into the same group here. And there's been a theme in all four of Wisconsin's losses, and then they've fallen into those categories. Wisconsin never led in Milwaukee. Again, we're not talking about a great Villanova team here. They had a huge rebuild in the offseason, brand new head coach in Kevin Willard, who comes over from Maryland. Now, Willard's given Gard some problems in the past. He's had some Maryland teams that really put belt to ass to the Badgers in the past. But again, this is a brand new Villanova team that, you could look at Wisconsin and say, well, they're still trying to find chemistry. They got a bunch of new players that they're trying to break in. This is the same goes for Villanova. That's a brand new ball club with a bunch of players who have never played with each other before. Wisconsin's got pieces back. They shouldn't have been the team that was on their heels for 30 minutes, probably closer to 40 if you include overtime. There were a couple times it looked like the Badgers were going to gain control of this one. Again, to Villanova's credit, Bryce Lindsey comes out in overtime, scores 10 of his 12. Tyler Perkins was fantastic throughout the game and hit a couple silencers that sat the crowd down. Devin Askew, I thought, was terrific in the first half. But a season-high 16 turnovers for Wisconsin leads to 15 Villanova points. The Badgers allowed 14 offensive rebounds to a front court that isn't overly imposing or athletic. That led to 16 second chance points for the Wildcats. The Badgers only got to the free throw line 10 times. 0 of those took place in the first half. UW was in the bonus the last 16-plus minutes if you include overtime, and they only got to the free throw line 6 times once they hit that bonus. They should have been living at the charity stripe to get themselves, not only to get themselves back into the game, but gain control over it. There were a couple calls that didn't go Wisconsin's way. I know John Blackwell put his head down a few times, looked like he'd get a call, wasn't getting it. Nick Boyd, too. I didn't love the officiating, but I'm not going to blame it. It felt like they were really inconsistent with how they wanted that game to be called. For a lot of the game, they let it go. They let the teams play. There wasn't a lot of whistles, and then you saw Wisconsin starting to get some momentum, and all of a sudden there was a tight whistle the last 4 or 5 minutes of regulation. So it was a tough game to play from that regard, but certainly nothing that stopped Wisconsin from winning that one. The bigger issues were the things they could control, but I understand maybe some frustration and why they didn't live at the free throw line as much as they should have. But all that sort of undid what really, if you look at the box score, probably should have been, I don't want to say comfortable win for Wisconsin, but certainly a win for the Badgers. I mean, you take the overtime numbers out of the equation, Wisconsin significantly outshot Villanova. It ended up being 45-40 in favor of the Badgers, but there was about an 11% difference late in that game. But again, 16 turnovers, 14 offensive rebounds for Villanova, inability to get to the free throw line and create easy points. All undid what should have been Wisconsin's first quad one victory of the season. So going forward, let's start to focus on some of the glaring issues of this team. I feel like I misled a lot of people. I thought this group would be really good, at least from an offensive standpoint. I thought they would be better. Now, they've shown flashes, major flashes, the ability to score 90, 100 on any given night. Obviously, that's faded here the last couple weeks. But one thing I did say about this group was I thought their holes would be harder to cover up than what last season's team in their makeup sort of was. And starting with, I don't think this is the biggest hole or biggest problem with this team, but one thing I said immediately after the exhibition loss to Oklahoma was, I think this has to be John Blackwell's team. And I was a little disappointed in him on Friday. I'm not going to lie. I mean, where was the guy who Greg Gard said feels like nobody can guard him anytime he steps out on the floor? We saw it early this season. I even saw it in the loss to TCU. The first half, he sees his team struggling. Things aren't going well. Offense is sputtering. Guys have this deer in the headlights look that, all of a sudden is a complete 180 from where things started on that end of the floor. I mean, you had guys turning down shots that they were never turning down this year. And you look at what the reserves did. They only took outside of the big three. So even some of the starters, too, outside of the big three of Rapp, Boyd, Blackwell, the rest of the team combined took 14 shots and made 4 of them. And you saw a lot of what looked like sloppy passes and guys that necessarily weren't ready for it. I think that's because you saw guys turning down shots that they haven't turned down all season. I don't know if it was just Villanova and kind of the way they chose to attack Wisconsin defensively. It was a little similar to TCU, where it brought a lot of guard pressure. They doubled Blackwell and Boyd on dribble drives, especially when they turned turn their back to the rest of the defense. You saw a second defender come in and start to swarm, and that'll lead into one of what maybe the biggest problem for this team is that we'll touch on later, and why Wisconsin can't really combat that. But back to Blackwell, you saw a little spurt there in the second half. To his credit, hit a big time three to pull that game within 50-47. Overtime, 0 for 4, misses a key layup, and sometimes you can't always boil down a performance to how somebody shoots, but I think you look at how that game was playing out, very physical. Wisconsin needed trips to the free throw line. That's your X factor in this game, a guy who loves to play bully ball, and especially in the first half, John Blackwell, some of his best stuff comes in transition in the open floor when it's just him and one other defender, and he can use his strength to outmuscle the opposing guard. I thought he turned down a lot of transition drives and pulled the ball back out. And I have not seen that from him in his career, or at least when he started to become a star here, going back to last season. I don't know if there was something different in the game plan, after what happened against Nebraska, where Wisconsin took a ton of bad shots, maybe changed his style of play, maybe got in his head a little bit, but I would be shocked if Greg Gard told him not to pursue those. He just didn't feel like he had his foot on the gas pedal throughout that game. And I wouldn't say this stuff if I didn't think highly of him. He's capable of putting Wisconsin on his back and carrying the Badgers to the finish line. And on nights like Friday, where everyone outside of the Big Three is struggling, I don't think he has a choice if Wisconsin's going to win a game like that. But all season, and even in the preseason, I've been wondering if there's an adjustment period for him. Yeah, I said this after the Oklahoma exhibition, but this has to be John Blackwell's team. No disrespect to Nick Boyd. I think when Boyd is at his best, at least offensively, his best is better than Blackwell's best. But Boyd's floor is so much lower. And you saw that again on Friday. Has a couple of coast-to-coast baskets. Wisconsin's rolling. He's bringing life into the arena. I mean, he picked up the Badgers off the ground and got them in that game without a doubt. Nola winner too, but Boyd's play, specifically when he's able to get in the open floor and just become a blur and become a one-man press break, that takes Wisconsin to a different level. But he also had some bad turnovers in that stretch, including one in overtime that essentially sealed Wisconsin's fate, had a defensive breakdown that led to a foul. People make this comparison. I don't love it, but if I were to give advice to Greg Gard, not that he needs it from me, the guy's probably forgotten more basketball than I'll ever know, but my thought would be, don't make the same mistake you did with AJ Storr and let it get to a point where Nick Boyd is still running wild in March and it eventually sinks your season. I don't want to compare those two because I think the mental makeup is not the same at all. I think some people, and I have the luxury of being on the floor at some games, so I kind of pay attention to body language and the way guys carry themselves. I think Nick Boyd is maybe misunderstood by some. The guy really wants to win. I don't think he does some of the things he does to be selfish. That is 100% my belief, and me not trying to put lipstick on a pig here and misrepresent who I think he is. I can see the way he carries himself. The guy goes balls to the wall, 100 miles an hour to try and win basketball games, not to try and pad his own stats. But where some of the similarities come up is they both kind of have this tunnel vision feel offensively. They're wired in a way that maybe they don't make the best decisions on the floor and see the entire floor, make the best basketball play at times. And this is especially true after they've made a couple. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen for those two is when they make a couple shots early, because then all of a sudden they're up here and they think they're untouchable. And I think the other thing too is the feel for the game, especially when things aren't going well. I was watching that movie, the replacements on the flight to San Diego, and it kind of made me think of Nick Boyd when the quarterback is talking about playing in quicksand, and things aren't going right, and your instinct is to play harder and try and get yourself out. Well, in quicksand, you do that, you're just going to sink faster, and I think Boyd plays to that in some extent. When Wisconsin's struggling, he tries to do too much, and instead of slowing down, letting the game come to him, and things often can get worse. And you saw a lot of that with AJ Storr, where he just didn't have an off switch. It would be bad shot after bad shot, trying to undo the last one. And, he could shoot you out of games. And I don't think Nick Boyd would ever do that to that extent, but I get where some of the similarities come. But back to that Oklahoma game, and why I said what I said was you saw Nick Boyd trying to do everything. And Blackwell got a couple shots in those final moments, actually hit 2 mid-range buckets to keep Wisconsin within striking distance, but he had to go get the ball and make it happen. It wasn't happening organically through the offense, and things weren't flowing through Blackwell. And there's a lot of games this season where things aren't flowing through him. And possessions often get stuck in Nick Boyd's hands. He's been getting better at it. I didn't see it a ton in the Villanova game, but again, being on the floor, I hear some things, and almost every game this season, you hear Greg Gard screaming to Boyd, move the ball, move the ball. And, like Storr, Boyd's a guy that thrives with the ball in his hands. He needs the ball in his hands to be effective. And you want him to be able to do the things that he brings to the table, but this offense, when it's operating at its peak efficiency, it's not sticking in anyone's hands. Now, I'm not trying to expose or create a problem that might not be there. This is just my feeling on the outside. But I wonder if this has been an adjustment for John Blackwell after playing with John Tanji last season. And why I say that is it was so rare to have a star in Tanji who was as selfless as he was. He could score 30 or 40 and not disrupt the flow of the offense whatsoever. He was a guy that didn't need a ton of dribbles to be successful and get his shot off. Guys could trust him to get the ball back if they gave it up. And now all of a sudden you have this dynamic with Boyd and Blackwell. Again, you want guys to be who they are. And I'm not saying Nick Boyd shouldn't be taking 15 shots and dribbling and creating off the bounce like he has been, because he should be. But again, Nick Boyd is about as good as it gets in the open floor. He's a one-man press break. He can collapse a defense and create a lot for other people too. But I also need him, if I'm a coach, to read the flow of the game, understand what it's going to take to make this team successful. If you're having the game you were against Providence and it's rolling, by all means, go out there, do your thing. Don't even look at the bench for guidance. Do what you do. But again, you don't need a leash in those games. But if this is Nebraska, Villanova, especially Nebraska a couple games ago, and you're looking at Sam Hoiberg, who is about as gritty as it gets in this league, you do not play with that guy the way he did. And especially if you're struggling with turnovers. If I'm Greg Gard, I need you to get rid of the ball and start playing off it. Move around, hunt your catch and shoot threes, get that defense moving, and open up things for everybody else. He's got to know when it's his night and when it's not his night. More problems for Wisconsin, and I don't know if they're fixable this season. It's kind of like the NIT season to some extent, where people were wondering if things were going to get turned around, and I said, probably not, just because the holes in this team can't be fixed. You got to get in the portal a year in the offseason and fix them. The makeup of this team just isn't going to allow it. And maybe the biggest problem right now is Wisconsin is too guard-oriented. This isn't a team, in my opinion. I've been surprised before, I've been wrong before, but I don't think they're going to find a back-to-the-basket threat from their front court this season. And they were exposed once again by a team like BYU, TCU, Villanova hounded Wisconsin's guards, and there was no way to really alleviate that pressure. How much do you miss Stephen Krall now? That was a big luxury for Wisconsin for so long, not just because he could play with his back to the basket and get you some easy stuff down low, but when teams brought pressure to the guards, you could dump the ball in there. He could alleviate it. And, Tyler Wall, too, to some extent, was that guy. You could trust those two to get you something very high percentage in the post. But I think one of the areas that a lot of people didn't talk about much was teams that bring heavy guard pressure. All that goes away when you have the ability to dump the ball in the post. And, if they want to continue to bring pressure, they can double the post. And a lot of times teams religiously did, but those two were terrific passers that were able to see over the top of the defense, get the ball out of their hands and, get the assist or get the hockey assist that led to a three. I get why a lot of people ragged on those two for a lot of years, but, and the bigger problem isn't that Wisconsin doesn't have them anymore. It's that Wisconsin didn't replace them and get a guy who, could do some of those things. It hurts this team a lot to not have a back to the basket big. And don't get it twisted. Wisconsin tried to get one. The problem in the portal era is these guys are very expensive and there's not very many of them. Supply and demand, right? Very few of them. The price goes way up. I remember a couple of years ago, Wisconsin's been trying to get a monster too. Like ever since Chris Vogt left, just a shot blocking physical presence. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to Guard and he was talking about somebody that came out of the portal. I think it was from BYU, reserve center. Didn't play a ton. I think averaged about 3 points a game, but he had size and he could move. And, the first question the kid asked Guard is, how much money can I get? Guards, this is before Wisconsin, really was cemented in this era and really embracing it. But, Guard, how much do you need? And I guess the number was like 650,000. And that pretty much ended the talks between those two. And again, this was a couple of years ago. That guy might be worth $1 million now. I don't remember who it was, but it was a pretty staggering number for a guy that averaged about 3 points a game, and I think had games where he didn't even get off the bench. But that's how hard it is to find bigs in the portal era, and this is why I kind of went to bat for Will Garlock. A lot of people didn't like that pickup, but my biggest takeaway is you have no idea how much money he's going to save Wisconsin. A 7-footer who's fluid, coordinated, doesn't play a lot right now. Hopefully, for the Badgers' sake, they can get him going and he can provide some of that interior presence they need. But, even if he never scores a point, guys like that cost a ton of money to get in the portal. I think if all else fails, he'll be a terrific post defender, somebody who can switch on the ball screens defensively and defend a guard. Like there's not many 7-footers that I've covered that move like him, at least at the high school AAU level when I was watching him. And for him to be able to come out of your own backyard is a huge luxury for Wisconsin. And, they may not, assuming he stays for 4 or 5 years and, 4 years because he's not redshirting. Can't take anything to the bank, but you'd think a hometown kid who grew up a Badger fan, the chances are pretty high of him doing that. But that'll be a huge luxury for Wisconsin not to have to potentially seek that in the portal and allow them to focus resources in other areas. Excuse me. But Alexis Bieliauskas, I don't think is going to get there in terms of back to the basket. Nolan Winter had a great game against Villanova, maybe one of his best as a Badger thus far. 23 points and 9 of 12 shooting, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks. But you saw his one post touch. It was an absolute train wreck, led to a turnover. That's just not him. The whole front court minus Garlock is essentially made of finesse bigs that aren't going to get you very many easy buckets around the rim, and they're probably going to have to come on offensive rebounds. And I just wonder how much pressure that's going to put on Wisconsin's backcourt all season, and if it's sustainable. I mean, I don't know how many nights in the Big Ten they can survive a bad game from Blackwell or Boyd, given the pressure that backcourt's going to be playing, especially if you're not going to get a ton of offensive production from Andrew Rohde, which hasn't come right now, or Jack Janicki, Braden Carrington. I mean, these guys aren't big time scorers that necessarily can carry you when you don't have your best stuff. At least we haven't seen it to this point. But going back to the roster makeup, and one of the reasons I think this team might be in real trouble, the decision in itself, you probably could have allocated enough resources to get the back to the basket big, and there's a big case to be made for that. But you just have to look at what Wisconsin has to offer these kids out of the portal and what it would have cost you to potentially overpay for a big. And you could argue it's maybe more important than other spots, but let's just look at what might have happened here if you got somebody out of the portal, a 7-footer who averages 8 to 10 points a game and does a little bit in the post and is certainly can hold his own in the Big Ten defensively. But you'd probably be looking at getting rid of Andrew Rohde, maybe Braden Carrington as well, for what it would have cost you to get that guy. Now, arguments for both, but maybe even Jack Janicki too. I don't think he's a guy that would necessarily leave, but he got a new deal. He's a guy that has a future in this program as a potential starter down the road. I don't know if I'd want to risk it, not maybe taking care of him the way Wisconsin did. But again, if all else fails, you get a culture guy for cheap, probably a discount, somebody that wants to be here. And again, I know he hasn't had the season and made the jump that many have expected him to make thus far, but it's early. You got to remember he is still a sophomore, and I think has a lot of time to be a really good player in this program. But that brings us to the other key issue with this team, and one that I'm not sure is fixable, the bench. I asked a few times about this in the offseason, and it was dismissed each time. But I didn't think the Badgers replaced, or maybe could replace, what Kamari McGee and Carter Gilmore gave them off the bench last season. I know he wasn't a bench player, but throw Max Klesmit into that mix too. I thought losing some of these culture guys, and certainly the ones who came off the bench, would be a bigger loss or tougher to replace than John Tonji. I can still get scoring with this team. I know the last couple games they haven't shown it, but we all know what this team is capable of offensively. Now, what you can't replace is some of the firepower those guys gave you off the bench. They were both, I don't want to use the term lockdown defensive guys, but they were very good at, and they understood Greg Gard's defensive principles and ran them and executed them to a T. Wisconsin, it wasn't a surprise, often got better when one of those two stepped on the floor. We saw it 2 years ago when Kamari McGee got hurt, how much it ended up hurting that team. Those two just had somewhat of an it factor, and they were stars in their roles. I mean, those guys are tough to replace. They were happy whether they took 0 shots or 20 shots. They brought you the same type of consistency night in and night out. And the other part of it too was, there was a different vibe on the team with those three because they were Wisconsin guys. I mean, with this revolving door of college athletics, I mean, here were 3 guys that fans could wrap their arms around and get behind because you knew those 3 bled for the program. And it sort of felt like old times again before the portal, before NIL, where, you had guys who would do anything to win a basketball game and shed blood, sweat, and tears. And, you obviously they're getting paid, but you knew they weren't in it for the money. And so far, you thought Jack Janicki might be that guy to replace him. So far, he hasn't made that jump. And it's not even about the scoring, but it's all the little things we were accustomed to see him doing last year. Stuff that didn't show up in the stat box that hasn't shown up at least to mid-December here. Braden Carrington, again, kind of a similar makeup. I don't necessarily have a knock on him. He's a 3-and-D guy. The Badgers need him to make shots. He's a plus defender, but I don't know if he's necessarily good enough defensively to justify playing him 10 plus minutes if he's not hitting threes. I mean, you're not counting on him going into a game and shutting down the other team's best players, all I'm saying. But he adds a little bit to what you're doing defensively, and they probably missed him in that Villanova game a little bit just because that thing became a slugfest for quite a while. Moving Austin Rapp to the bench, I liked it. It seemed to work initially. Now I'm a little hesitant on it. Look, Wisconsin needs a scoring punch off the bench. I think every time he steps into a game, now he can sort of focus on shooting threes. You're often matched up with the other team's third or fourth best forward. You might get lost a little bit more on the offensive end of the floor. Defensively, you might not be dealing with a big-time offensive rebounder or a big-time back-to-the-basket scorer. I thought that would help him. Again, it looked like it would work initially, but after Villanova, he's clearly dealing with something mentally that's affecting his outside shot. It's affecting all areas of his game. It got to the point where guard wouldn't even put him back in the game in the second half. I'm not sure if he had 2 air balls or 1. The first one might have got blocked. It was tough for me to see. But then he had the drive in the second half where it comes to a 2-foot jump stop and just loses the ball. And yeah, I said this when he committed because I watched 5 or 6 of his games, but Wisconsin was going to have a problem pairing him with Nolan Winter in terms of playing the grind of the Big Ten season, because Nolan Winter is a finesse big that spends most of his time on the perimeter. That's where he's comfortable. Austin Rapp has a very similar makeup, wants to shoot a lot of threes, doesn't want to mix it up in the paint, and specifically defensively, he was not that guy. You saw I watched some of his bigger games, and especially Gonzaga and, teams with some size, they would often isolate him on the block and make him defend one-on-one, and that's just not who Austin Rapp is. And asked Greg Gard about this after the loss to TCU. Well, how do you get these guys, and, it's more of a question about Rapp, it was asked about everybody, but how do you get these guys to play with this certain physicality that you need on the defensive end and the toughness and the grit when that's just not their mental makeup? And I believe, to an extent, a lot of these guys, you are who you are. Like, you don't change in that regard overnight. And it's something that happens to when you're young. Like, Zach Showalter didn't just wake up and decide to be Zach Showalter one day. Brad Davison didn't just flip a switch and decide to be one of the best competitors Wisconsin's ever seen. That's the way they've been their whole lives. And now you're sort of demanding Austin Rapp to be something that he's not. It's not his fault. He shouldn't be playing next to Nolan Winter. Wisconsin should have a more physically imposing big next to him. They complement each other in some ways. I think the big-to-big passing between those two and even Biliauskas, those three, Garlock too, all 4 of them could pass the rock and play with each other offensively. That's not the problem. But when it comes to rebounding, defending, and setting a tone on the interior, they're finesse guys, and you can yell and scream and demand them to do this, but I just don't see it happening, at least overnight. And maybe they'll get to a point in their careers where they bring that after enough practice and work and being around Greg Steensma and Joe Krabbenhoff, but that's just not who they are. After the Nebraska game too, it felt like it was just talk. He mentioned it a little bit after Villanova as well, saying, the 6 guys or whatever who helped get us back in the game, that's who I need to lean on. So there's been talk about adjusting the lineup and maybe even the starting lineup again, but who are you realistically going to play to get you out of this hole and out of this rut? I mean, are you really going to start Braden Carrington over Nick Boyd? You've already made a move with Alexis Biliauskas. You're really going to give Will Garlock a shot? I mean, that doesn't seem like it's happening. You're not taking Nolan Winter off the floor. A guy I might try if it gets bad enough, is Zach Kinzinger. Unfortunately, they're trying to redshirt him. I think that's what he wants to do. I'm told the Badgers, they won't redshirt him now. They'll keep him ready. They'll keep him dressed, and he'll come in there in case of emergency. But you talk about Brad Davison, Zach Showalter, even Josh Gosser, a lot of that DNA is in this kid. You don't have to coach heart and toughness with him. It's not an apples to apples situation, but you look at the football team with how things sort of turned around with Mason Posa and Cooper Catalano in there. Obviously, they produced at a ridiculously high level that Kinzinger probably wouldn't. That helps, but they played with a different energy and passion, and it rubbed off on everybody else on the defensive side of the football. Seeing a true freshman like Kinzinger go in there, mix it up, scrap the way I know he's going to, that might light a fire under everybody else. Again, I don't want to burn his red shirt unless you absolutely have to, but that's a move I would be considering if I'm Greg Gard. Hayden Jones got in there again with Carrington out, saw more minutes, played 8 minutes. For most of it, it was really rough for him. I don't know why they continue to put him at point guard, especially when you had Blackwell and Rhodey out there. Teams know when he's bringing the ball up. And again, I'm sitting on the floor. I can hear the other teams. Sometimes, every time he checks into the game, the other team's telling that guard to pick him up full court and get after him. He committed 2 turnovers. To his credit, hit a big shot late in that second half there, an off-balance runner late in the shot clock as well, where he didn't have any choice. But you could see the game's moving a little too fast for him right now. I like him long-term. He's a 6'5" kid that can play point guard, can probably play multiple positions, defend multiple positions as well. But that's a guy that ideally you wouldn't be playing as much as you're playing right now. But Greg Gard seems to like him, especially on the defensive end. And you saw him get in there over Janicki late. That might be the move that Greg Gard's alluding to there. Big picture for Wisconsin. It's December 20th. Wisconsin is outside the top 70 in the NCAA net rankings, which are obviously going to have huge implications on the NCAA tournament hopes. Wisconsin doesn't have a quad 1 victory. There will be a ton of opportunities in Big Ten play, but with Marquette being as poor as they are, they're not going to get a chance in non-conference play to get a resume-building win. They wrap up the slate here with Central Michigan and Milwaukee, both at home. A lot of people on the board, social media, wherever, have been wondering, or actually just flat out saying, is this a good team? Or this is a bad team? But can we please just quit it with the fire guard stuff? I feel like some of you have to collectively learn the same lesson year in and year out. Now, if they finish in the bottom half of the Big Ten or barely make the NCAA tournament or don't make it at all, by all means, do what you have to do. You should be demanding more. I'm never against that. And to this point, they have not lived up to expectations, and you could categorize this 11-game stretch as a failure. But this is also basketball, not football. We don't live week to week here. There's more patience required. I mean, also, if you don't fire Luke Fickell, how the hell are you going to fire Greg Gard? Let's be serious about that. I don't care if Wisconsin loses every game the rest of the season. That would be a ridiculous precedent to set if you're Chris McIntosh. But back on Gard, this is what he does. This is where he thrives. For all of his shortcomings you think he might have as a head coach, the one area he excels at, and even if you're the biggest Greg Gard hater in the world, you have to admit he excels at turning things around. This is where he thrives as a coach. Every time you think it's run its course with him, bam, like a phoenix from the ashes, he gets the best out of his group all of a sudden. I'm not saying there's not a lot to be desired with the finishes in the NCAA tournament and all that. I believe me, I get it. I'm at that point too, where the guy needs to make it to the second weekend. But this is what this guy does. This is where he's at his best as a head coach. He's proven it time and time again. It's his first full season, that team that lost to, or his first season team that lost to Western Illinois, lost to Milwaukee, takes it over for Bo Ryan. They're a Sweet 16 team. There was the Kobe King year where he leaves midseason. I forget how many they lost, 8 of 10 or whatever. Turns it around. They win a Big Ten championship, win the last 7. Number 1 seed in number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament. That never happened. There have been a few others that I won't name. You know his history, but let's just give it a little time before we write this season off as being over and Guards finished at Wisconsin. I've seen it happen too many times where he stuns us all and pulls a complete 180 in the season. Again, this is what the guy does. So Wisconsin will be back at it on Monday against Central Michigan. I'm not sure we'll learn a ton from that one. We'll have to wait till Big Ten play to see if this team can get itself out of this rut. And then that next Big Ten game is a big one. January 3rd against currently number 6 Purdue. Students are on break too, so I don't know what the Kohl Center is going to look like for that one, but I'll try and keep these a little more regular now the football season's over and get Jordan back. He's super busy with stuff at the Big Ten Network, so it's been tough to get him, which is why I haven't done one. I kind of hate doing these by myself because I don't think I'm very good at this, but I wanted to get one out anyway. Just kind of run down my thoughts, so I'll try and keep this regular. I don't know if I'll do one anytime soon, just because it's Central Michigan and Milwaukee, and the games are 8 days apart, and I don't know if we'll learn too much about this team beyond then. But expect once Big Ten play once Big Ten play wraps back up. Let me start that over because I can't. Once Big Ten play resumes, I think we'll get back to doing these on a pretty regular basis, but had a lot of stuff to get off my chest for this one. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys probably back in January.